All right, this is Citizenship and Immigration Attorney Parviz Malakouti. Welcome to our 44th Mobility Space. Today we're talking about speech and ETAs and the effect of speech on tourist visas and general mobility. As a reminder, this is our 44th Mobility Space of 50 that we're doing this year on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty, and of course, passports. Who could forget about the passports? Anybody can speak. Everybody is welcome to speak. If you want to speak, send a request. I will approve it right away. You don't have to wait for an invitation, although I will be inviting some people. If you want to speak, send the invite and cannonball into the discussion. Okay. So today's topic is speech. Okay. How can talking online, what are we seeing as far as trends of speech online affecting people's mobilities? Okay. And this is a topic that I think is really, really hot. And as hot as it is, I think it's actually just ramping up, right? And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because of just in 2025, all the really publicized instances that we've seen of people having their mobility curtailed, not based off of a conviction, not based off of travel to a particular evil country, but just based off of speech that they made online. And the reason that I see this speech as being a particularly rising attack vector to the mobility of people is not because it's a new thing that a person could be denied based on speech. A person, for decades, people have been able to be denied entry to the country or denied a visa based off of speech. That's not new. There are two things, however, that are new, okay, that I think is making this attack vector much sharper than before, okay? The first thing is, when I say new, I mean relatively new, the fact that more and more speech is online, okay? It's just easier to talk online. It's easier to publish things online, publish a blog post, publish on social media. Everybody is a publisher now online, okay? And speech online is easily accessible, it's extremely easily indexable, and it's easy to find by governments. Okay, so although people could always be denied previously based off of speech, there's just more speech of people that's out there nowadays, and therefore there's a bigger pool of speech, from which a particular government can find something that's particularly nasty or offensive to them, such that they would want to deny entry or deny the ETA or deny the visa issuance. So that's the first thing that's new relatively. And the second thing that is new is we have this rise of ETAs, electronic travel authorizations. So I've tweeted before, I've said it in previous spaces, visa free is becoming visa light. Okay. And what I mean by that is we're increasingly see it be the case that people can no longer just pick their passport up, book a flight, and arrive in a foreign country and gain entry visa free. More and more countries and zones are requiring an electronic travel authorization before a person travels, quote unquote, visa free to that country. Now, why does that matter? Okay, that matters because that's an information collection point before they enter. Anytime, as soon as a country implements an information collection point, it's very easy for them to change the questions, to add a question. It's very easy to just add a question. List all of your social media handles, okay? Or have you ever spoken out against, the, democracy of the European Union or against American values, those types of things. It's very, very easy to add those things. So the seal being broken, okay, as far as relatively unfettered access to a foreign country, in my opinion, is the imposition of the ETA. Okay, that's the seal being broken. Even if you have an ETA, I haven't seen one yet that's a single question. Most I've seen are like at least 6 or 7 questions. But even if you had hypothetically an ETA that's imposed for citizens of one country to gain visa-free access to another country, and that ETA had just a single question, to me, that's still a threshold moment. Okay, that's a seal being broken because one question going to 8 questions or 10 or 15 is easy. Okay, that's not something that even requires legislation. It's an agency level, immigration agency level decision, and it happens easily. And in my opinion, it's going to happen easy. And that's an information collection point, especially for speech. Okay, so those are the two new things, in my opinion, okay, that's making speech be more of an attack vector for people's mobilities, okay? And I use the term mobility, of course, to mean basically literally just moving from one place to another. So I use mobility in the broad sense, okay, meaning immigration somewhere is mobility, visiting somewhere is mobility, even citizenship I kind of include under the umbrella of mobility. And what I want to talk about specifically is what I see as kind of the four big choke points, right? The four big vulnerability points, okay, as far as speech is concerned. So one is denial of tourist visas. So that's a full-fledged tourist visa. Okay, the whole shebang where you have to actually typically go to a consulate in person, interview, etc. Number two, potential denial of electronic travel authorizations. Number three, denial of entry to the country. Okay, and then number four, status revocation slash removal of a person from a country when the person's already there. Okay, and one of the examples that we'll talk about is this Turkish F1 visa student in the United States who had her status revoked by the United States because of an op-ed that she wrote that was critical of Israel. So that's a case where, she wasn't applying for an ETA. She already applied for a visa, F1 student visa, came to the US, okay, and she basically, had to fight off, revocation of that status when she was in the United States. So this is what I see as, at least now, the four vulnerability points, okay, when it comes to to speech, okay, and the effect that speech can have on people's mobility. Now, aside from this being, just an interesting topic, to talk about, being a citizenship and immigration lawyer, I'm usually most interested in the angle of how it affects clients, how it affects people, and what people can do. First of all, what people can expect to come down the pike, okay? And then what people can do to kind of either adjust their expectations or adjust their mental model, okay, of how to think about their long-term mobility plans, where they, where they, pursue citizenship, residency, etc. And of course, other things that they can do to prepare, right? So that's kind of the angle that I always have in the back of my mind when I'm reading about this type of thing and thinking about this type of thing and talking today. And of course, we got Patrick here as our co-host. I'm sure we're going to have a good conversation, and hopefully I can get a few ideas from you guys as well who are joining in here. Okay. So a couple things. Okay. So ETAs are in the upswing. Okay. So for people who haven't read my previous tweets, okay, ETA, electronic travel authorization, it's what visa-free is morphing into, as I mentioned before. United States started ESTA, okay, which is the United States version of the ETA in 2008. Okay. So people who are citizens of the 42 countries that have quote unquote visa-free access to the United States per the ESTA program, they have to first apply for that electronic travel authorization, ESTA, be approved, and then come in. So the US already implements this for not all. We have Canadians, of course, and a few Caribbeans, but for the vast majority of countries that have visa-free access to the United States, they have to go through ESTA. That's already in place. UK started their own ETA and started rolling out in earnest in 2023. At the beginning of this year, in January 2025, Americans who wanted to visit the United Kingdom visa-free had to start filling out their ETA. Okay, Australia already has an ETA. Japan is going to roll out with their version of an ETA. They call it JESTA. That's the acronym, JESTA, in 2028. And then, of course, the big one, which we've touched on before, and what I think is going to be the one that hits Americans like a Mack truck, is when the European Union rolls out their version of an ETA, which is ETIAS. And currently it's scheduled to be rolled out in 2026. They've delayed it. It's almost a running joke now. They've delayed it so many times. It was supposed to be implemented years ago by now. Now they say 2026, supposedly. Maybe they push it back again, but the point is, eventually, an ETA to visit Europe is coming for American citizens, right? So this is, the ability to escape answering questions and escape evaluation or potential evaluation of your speech before you visit another country visa-free, even as an American, is dissipating. It's disappearing, right? So, this is, different people might want to react differently to this, right? Some people might want to curb their speech. Some people might want to say, no, F it. I'm a loudmouth. I want to have my opinion. I'm probably fall in that category personally. Want to be able to speak and say whatever you want to say. But the point is, this is coming, right? And this is something that people should be prepared for. And I think actually, and I want to talk about this, I think this has implications actually for the value of citizenship in general and for the value of certain citizenships, right? And we got King here in the King of Sardonica in the space. King, I don't know if you're going to be able to speak, but King brought up a great point yesterday that I agreed with, which is the imposition of ETAs in order for Westerners to visit certain countries is going to make it comparatively a little bit more attractive for those people to visit countries in which they don't have to fill out an ETA, right? And I think that stands to reason, right? If you have two places that you can visit visa free, one place provides more friction for you to visit, okay, well then comparatively, right, that means that there's a little bit of an opportunity for that second country to pick up more touristic market share. I think that's the case generally, even for an ETA applicant. So let's say an American in a few years that has a relatively clean profile. And I'll talk about what I mean by a clean profile in a moment. But that is especially the case if you're a person that doesn't have a clean profile, okay, and you're applying for an ETA. Now, what do I mean by a clean profile? What I mean by a clean profile is somebody who doesn't have qualities that are being targeted, okay, that are being inquired about in ETAs generally. And obviously, every country has their own ETA. I'm speaking generally about categories of questions that we see asked, okay? And those tend to be, first of all, criminal history, okay? Criminal history is one that's asked about in a lot of ETAs, okay? Countries want to know, have you ever been convicted? Some want to know even if you've ever been arrested or charged, okay? So that's one strike against a person applying for an ETA if they have to report that. Number two, travel to certain countries and to conflict zones. Okay, so if you've traveled to countries, that are in war, if you're like a, what do they call them, like a war or adventure tourist or war tourist, that type of thing, that's something that can, make it more difficult for you to get an ETA. A third category is people who have ever been removed from certain countries, okay, deported, or at least had a removal, an order of removal, even if they actually didn't get, shackles clapped on them, and even if they actually just left under their own power, if they ever even had an order of removal against them. Those are three big categories that we're seeing as far as showing up on ETA's questions, kind of inquiring about those. And what I think is going to be the fourth category, and obviously we're talking about it right now, is speech, okay? And not just any speech, but I think we're going to start seeing, this is just my speculation, I think we're going to start seeing questions creep onto these ETAs that ask if you have made statements or comments against democracy, against the rule of law in certain areas, the European Union, okay, anti-immigrant questions or statements. I think we're going to start seeing questions little by little creep in that ask about a person's type of speech, and ask about elements of a speech that might be, controversial or, let's say, offensive to the country, right? Every country has obviously their own culture, and it's not even necessarily the culture of the country that's being asked about. There's governments, right? It's bureaucrats that put these together, right? So obviously administrations change. What's considered extra offensive to one administration is not necessarily, considered offensive to the next admin in that country, and vice versa. And we saw that happen in 2024 in the United States, right? We saw a huge shift, big change in the type of speech that is considered offensive, right, to the United States, quote unquote, based on the opinion of the Biden administration versus the Trump administration. So that's another dynamic that we see here. But anyway, that's the introduction. I do want to actually get into some interesting questions here and some conversation. So I will kick off a question to my co-host here, Patrick. My first question, I think, to you, Patrick, is as far as this speech is concerned, what category of mobility asset do you think is going to be in the short term most vulnerable to speech policing? Okay, so do you think it's going to be more just straight up the visa applications, the ETAs, the entrances to the country, or people that are already in a country that are, let's say, on a non-immigrant visa, being targeted based off of their speech?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you pitched it to me first because this is I'm excited. Um, I think it depends on whether or not your country, how integrated your country is to kind of global mobility, right? Ver- and that makes a difference between whether or not it makes citizenship more vulnerable or you know visas plus more vulnerable. That includes tourist visas and electronic travel authorizations, ETAs. Um, if you are a country that is a destination for a lot of people who regularly need to apply for an ETA, then enforcing those speech laws is a big deal to non-citizens because they want to visit there and they can't because they're denied. Um, Whereas if you're a destination, but also you're just more globally integrated, the perfect example is the United Kingdom. It is the gateway to Europe for most of the Western Hemisphere. And so you're transiting through London Heathrow for a significant number of flights. It is the place that a lot of people stop and then transfer to go to a secondary or tertiary city on the continent. So, and I'll give you two examples here. The one that that everyone's probably pretty familiar with is the case of Graham Linehan, who was arrested in London Heathrow Airport over posts he made on X. I've been informed we cannot call them tweets anymore. So force of habit, but I'm overcoming it. He had some posts on X, and um, and they arrested him. He is a UK citizen, and he was charged under Scotland's uh, hate speech law. And in this case, um, it is the broad application or even extraterritorial application of that law, and the fact that he was transiting through the airport, um, in which case his citizenship made him vulnerable to the application of that law. Um, Side note, those charges were dropped, I think, last week or earlier this week. Um, but I think the headlines on it were so bad. Another example, whether or not you agree with her or disagree with her, um, it would be Candace Owens. She was denied a visa to enter Australia, I believe it was last week, and is fighting it in court. And I don't know the specifics of the case, but I have a hard time believing that it would not be for any other reason than the fact that she is such a public persona and has such a lot of things that she says on the record. Um, and we can get into it more, but the indexing of information, I think, is a pretty key component, a pretty key context to this conversation, which I'll delve in into the future of this in the future of this space. But yeah, for now, between whether or not you are a citizen or a non-citizen, looking at all of the mobility visa entrance components, these types of restrictions on speech or searchability of speech will impact you depending on the country's relationship kind of to the world, and where they are relative to your mobility, whether it's a transit spot or a final destination.
Yeah, you brought up a great point, Patrick. There's kind of two separate elements here. If you're not a citizen of the country or even a permanent resident, you know, maybe the most immediate attack vector is not being able to access the country, being denied the visa or entry. If you're a citizen of the country, okay, they may let you in, right? But then clap handcuffs on you, just like they did with Graham Linehan, right? Based off of your the speech and connection to the country by virtue of being a citizen, right? So yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, I didn't even mention really that aspect, which is being a citizen. Okay, like what is the effect of speech on mobility? If you're a citizen there and you can actually you can technically still gain access to the country, you won't be denied. You have immediate highest right of entry, but at the cost of having handcuffs be put on you, right? In which case, I think most rational people would not want to go to the country, right? Like one of the things I say is, better a mansion in a third world country than a prison in a first world country, right? I think it's relevant to go over some of the common questions that we see coming up here, right? So ETIAS, I'll start with ETIAS, okay, with Europe, because even though it's not implemented yet, I think probably this is pound for pound what Americans and many people around the world are going to be most interested in, just because, of course, to access the EU, it's there's so many countries, right? So these are some of the questions that are expected to be on the ETIAS. Okay, your name, date and place of birth, sex, nationalities, plural, home address, email address, and phone numbers. Your parents' first name, travel document details, your level of education and current occupation. Okay, that's interesting. I'll come back to that in a moment. The country of your first intended stay and the address of your destination, details about any past criminal convictions, past travel to war or conflict zones, and whether you have recently been the subject of a return decision, right? Return decision means broadly like an order of removal from a country. So that's what we have coming down the pike. Level of education and current occupation. Do I think that that's going to be used at least in the beginning to make decisions on ETA approvals? I don't think so. Do I think it could be used down the pike for a decision? Do I think that any information collected from a person can be used against them and eventually, over a long enough timeline will be used against them? Yeah, I do, right? So to me, the shorter the better, the fewer the questions, the better. And any question that is asked about a person that can provide a negative response or what's perceived as a negative response, in my opinion, is a negative, right? And if you're talking about level of education and current occupation, it's no secret. Countries use that all the time as a factor to consider whether they think the person is a risk for overstay or not, right? We do that in the United States, okay, meaning U.S. government does that. Most governments do that, okay? That's just a fact of life. If you're somebody that's a high level of education and a high earning, prestigious occupation in your home country, right? The general idea is or presumption is that you're less likely to be an overstay, right? So this is what we have coming down the pike, okay, for ETIAS. Now, I think it's worth noting we did have some what I call redneck research. I like this term. I heard this recently. Redneck research, meaning basically not really technical research, but just kind of like firsthand experiences, right? Anecdotal research, which it gets dunked on a lot by a lot of lawyers and kind of academics. Yes, it has its limitations, but I think actually anecdotal research is some of the most important research. It's actually the reality of what's happening on the ground. I don't think you need to have an article published in a peer review academic article, publication in order for observations, okay, to be used and to have weight. But anyway, yesterday one of our colleagues, immigration attorney Adrian Pandev, reported that he went to the UK, I think last week, using the ETA, the United Kingdom ETA, and he reported that he had a smooth process. He said that I think it took him less than 15 minutes to fill out the ETA application. He filled it out and he went. And to be fair, that's how I think it's going to be for the majority of people, especially in the beginning. I don't think that Americans with a clean record are going to be denied en masse, right? But just remember, anytime you have to fill out that application, and if they do deny some people, that's something you have to consider when you're planning vacations that you did not have to consider before. Okay, so if you are, if you know 100 people, right, and 2 or 3 of those people have been denied an ETA to, the EU or the UK within the last few years, right? Well, that's going to take primacy in your mind. That's going to be in your mind. You're going to have to plan for that. You're going to have to consider for that. Even if it's a little bit, you have to consider that if your vacation is dependent on approval of an ETA, that it's possible, albeit small possibility, that you will be denied that ETA. Okay, so it's obviously overall a negative. And I think, again, I mean, I sound like a broken record at this point. I think that the information it's collected at first. These things are oftentimes implemented as painlessly as possible in the beginning to condition people, okay, to doing it. Oh, it's not a big deal. It's just filling out a quick form. It took 10 minutes. Oh, super smooth. It was so easy. That's the way they want it to be. That's the way they want your reaction to be. Okay, these authorities, and then you're conditioned to believe that to accept and understand that this is a condition of visiting the country, and then a few years down the line they start implementing informally or formally more criteria to deny people on, right? So I think that's an issue. Um, Now, Candace Owens. Candace Owens is a great example. I linked to an article. She was denied the visa in Australia in the spring, I believe, and she appealed it. And I believe that it was last week that there was a court decision on it. Okay. Another example that I linked to was Bob Vylan. Okay, he's an English musician. He led a chant at a music festival in the UK, death to the IDF. That went viral, and the United States revoked his visa. Okay, that's one example. Another example was Rumeya Öztürk. That's the Turkish student that was in the United States on an F1 visa. Okay, revoked. It's actually technically status revocation, right? Because F1 visa is to get into the country. She was already in the country, so she's on status in the country, not in the visa. And she had that challenge because of her op-ed critical of Israel. And then we have Andrew Tate. This one's a little bit different. Okay, Andrew Tate is obviously super controversial figure, maybe the most controversial figure of the last few years. And I didn't find an instance where he was denied an ETA based off of the speech, but what did happen is that news broke over the summer that he may have obtained Vanuatu's citizenship by investment. And of course, that set The Guardian. So The Guardian is a British publication, okay, very left leaning, highly, highly critical of CBI, citizenship by investment, even to the point where they make they make false statements, okay, to malign CBI. So they hate CBI, and they're looking for any reason to paint CBI, and people get CBI in the worst lights. They got wind that Vanuatu may have gotten that Andrew Tate may have gotten Vanuatu citizenship. They start investigating it, okay, and apparently the agent that Tate used to get that next citizen publicly released. They told a journalist that he did get citizenship, that he was one of their clients. And then that basically triggered the Guardian to be hot on the trail of the Vanuatuan authorities, asking and hounding about Andrew Tate's Vanuatuan citizenship. Now, to the credit of the government of Vanuatu, they didn't end up trying to make a play or for his citizenship to throw him under the bus. And I think they could have, right? Because he is one of the least sympathetic figures that's out there, right? They didn't. They held firm, at least for now, and said there was no evidence of fraud or misstatements in his application. Okay, therefore, there's not a grounds, by which to revoke the citizenship. But that's basically, even though they didn't actually, try to rescind his citizenship, just being that close, that's the nightmare of any citizenship by investment client or any client that gets any second or third citizenship. Nobody wants to be in a position where you have a major publication that despises you, that maligns you, putting pressure on a small country that issued you a citizenship to look through your application with a microscope to find any type of irregularity that they can seize on in order to throw you under the bus and try to revoke your citizenship. So although he kept the citizenship, as far as we know, as far as it's been reported for now, that's a nightmare situation, right? And why is that? Why did this happen? Well, I would argue it's largely because of Tate's speech. Now the Tate situation is a little bit less clean of an example because he's also credibly charged with trafficking in Romania. But really, he came on the radar of mass media all around the world, more based off of his speech. Okay, kind of the ideology, being accused of being sexist, misogynist, all these types of things, right? So he has the spotlight on him. Mostly, I would argue more, at least in the beginning, it was more because of his speech. Now you could make the argument, okay, maybe it's in part because of his speech, but also in large part because of these charges in Romania against him, right? So this is a problem, right? Like like people's speech is putting pressure on all of these mobility assets. I focus more on visas and ETAs, which I see as the most immediate attack vector. But even citizenships, especially citizenships by investment, right, are under pressure, I think, or could be under pressure based off of speech of people that's out there. Um, King of Sardonica is here. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, King, but I just open ended. If you'd like to speak, you always got great comments on Twitter. You're welcome to come up and give your thoughts, whether you agree, disagree, or whatever it is. So I'll just leave that out there as an open invitation. But you know, the question that's in my mind is, what does this mean? What does this mean for a person that's a sovereign individual, an aspiring sovereign individual? Okay, what does this mean? You're saying about this attack vector. How can I do something that's actionable based off of this, right? As I mentioned at the beginning, this is kind of the lens that I think of these things through, right? And I'd start by basically just saying a few what I consider light findings, okay, things that I believe to be true, and those would be basically the basis of how I think one, can think about moving forward and recommendations that I might have for my clients or other people that are out there. But the first quote unquote finding, okay, that I would say is that Visa-free access, we already know, is a fragile, relatively fragile mobility benefit. And the first finding I would say is that this speech, more and more speech being online and how easily indexable it is, and the rise of ETAs makes visa-free access even more of a fragile of a mobility benefit. Okay, so that's kind of the first finding that I would say. Um, I would say as a second finding, citizenship matters. It has less value. Okay, it has and is increasingly having less value, not no value, still value, but less value comparatively for springboard benefits, but more of a value for immediate highest right of entry to a country. Okay, what I mean by that is in let's call the old regime. Okay, so let's say 5, 10 years ago, right, where less speech was online. Okay, fewer countries had ETAs, right? If you had citizenship in a country, right, there might not be that much or as much of a value in the delta of robustness of being able to enter that country because you're a citizen there versus being able to enter that country because you would have had visa-free access there. I think now we're seeing more of a delta there. Okay, the more fragile visa-free access to a country becomes, okay, comparatively, the more valuable immediate highest right of access to that country through citizenship becomes because it's harder, it's very difficult, much more difficult to deny a person access as a citizen based off of their speech than an ETA or even a tourist visa. Okay, so I would say simultaneously, so this the value of citizenship goes kind of in two different ways. The visa free benefit of the citizenship relatively comes down in value, but the immediate highest right of entry to that country goes up. Okay, so obviously this is going to benefit citizenships, disproportionately in countries that are fun, hot destinations to visit. Okay, so if you got citizenship in a country that you actually like to visit, okay, like you value that citizenship because you actually like spending time in that country, I think comparatively that value goes up a little bit. Number three finding I would say is that citizenship in the Schengen zone goes up, okay, because there's no controlled borders between the countries. Okay, in good times, okay, in times of non-crisis, we call it a borderless zone. I don't like the term borderless zone, right? Because there are actually borders and zones of sovereignty. I prefer the term an uncontrolled border, okay, between countries in the Schengen zone, right? So combining like what we said before, if you have immediate highest right of entry to your country of citizenship, and that country of citizenship is in the Schengen zone, okay, then that means you have highest immediate right of entry to the Schengen zone via that country of your citizenship. And then if the Schengen zone has uncontrolled borders between them, then you have in the best of times, right, ability to move between borders. And if you're moving over land, right, not on a flight, the country might not even know actually that you've entered that country, right? At least not in the beginning. You just, you drive across the border in a car, right? There's no ETA. There's no question about your speech. There's no information collection, checkpoint there, that your speech could get you in trouble at, right? So that would be my third quote unquote finding. And then the fourth finding, which kind of goes hand in hand, but it is different, is residency in a Schengen zone country relatively goes up in value. Okay, similar concept, right? When you have residency in a Schengen, zone country, okay, you have not highest right of entry, but you have immediate, let's call it, if it's a long-term residency permit, second highest right of entry to that country, okay, and then once you're in that country and that country's in the Schengen zone, then you can obviously move, between those countries without having to, apply for an ETA or that type of thing, right? So these are kind of what I think are shaping up. I gotta stop saying kind of. These are what I think are shaping up as the findings, okay, of this rise in speech being an attack vector to people's mobility. So what do people do? Okay, what should people do if they're in this situation, right? So um, people have different values. Value is subjective. I subscribe to that school of thought. Value is subjective. People, speech is valuable, but it matters at different levels for different people. Some people really value being able to speak and say things that are quote unquote controversial. Some people don't really value it that much. Okay, they might do it if they think there's no consequence or little consequence, but they're not willing to incur a serious consequence to their freedom of movement just to be able to express their opinion online or to be an activist or things like that. So the first thing I think that people need to do is just be aware, like, yeah, this thing matters, okay, and it's going to be used against you. First Amendment does not help you, okay. A lot of Americans have all kinds of confused ideas of what the First Amendment means, okay. The First Amendment protects you within the United States from adverse action by the U.S. government, okay. Uh, a foreign country is not bound in any way, shape, or form, okay, by the First Amendment to grant you access to that country or to not, make an adverse decision on your ETA or immigration application based off of your speech. So the first thing is people have to know that your speech, okay, could, okay, and I believe actually eventually will be at least a factor in deciding, whether your ETA is approved or your visa-free access is, or sorry, your visa application is approved to another country. That's the first thing that I would think about. The second thing I would think about is if you have, people that travel a lot, obviously everybody wants, I think it's reasonable that everybody wants as much access to as many countries as possible, all other things being considered equal. But in practice, I do believe that most people, even hardcore travelers, really have a limited number of countries that they really, really value being able to visit. I'm this way. Most people are this way. And I think that sweet spot is, this is just the numbers I come up with. I think it's like 8 to 15 countries. I think most people, even hardcore travelers, have about 8 to 15 countries that they really, really love having access to, that it would give them, it would form a pit in their stomach, okay, if they were to lose access to be able to visit one of those countries forever, okay. I would think about what are those countries, where are they located, okay. Are some of those countries in one of these zones, like Schengen zone or another zone that might be moving towards uncontrolled borders between them? If so, well, it might be worth it to consider working towards residency in one of those countries, or even citizenship straight away if you can, right? Um, that's one thing. And then the third thing that I would think about as far as what people can do is people who have unclean profiles for the purposes of ETA. And I don't mean this in any derogatory way. I just mean people that have qualities that are going to make it difficult, okay, for them, or make them vulnerable to ETA denials. They need to start thinking about what they can do now to blunt the effect of those characteristics. First thing that comes to my mind is criminal record. Okay, if you have a criminal record, especially if you're an American, and I think probably about 60% of our listeners are American. If you're American and you have a criminal record, you need to start thinking about what can you do to rehabilitate your FBI background check as much as possible. Why FBI background check? Because the FBI background check is the seminal criminal record document for American citizens that apply for citizenship in a foreign country and for residency in a foreign country. It's the FBI background check, the identity history summary. So if you're denied an ETA, okay, and then you have to fall back. Oftentimes, if people are, the way it works in a lot of countries is if you're denied an ETA, doesn't mean you're barred from visiting the country. It means oftentimes you fall down to having to apply for a full scale visa to that country. Okay, when you apply for a full visa to that country, you oftentimes are requested and have to provide a background check. For Americans, it's that FBI background check. So start thinking about what you can do to rehabilitate that FBI background check. So if you were convicted of a crime and you didn't get a post-conviction relief, like an expungement, expunction, sealing, and you qualify for it, you should start thinking about getting that post-conviction relief so that you can improve the FBI background check. If you were convicted of a crime and you did get some sort of post-conviction relief, okay, well, you need to see if it shows up on your FBI background check. So get your FBI background check, review it. That's, I would say, the number one thing that a person that's from, that has any type of criminal record, especially if you're from the United States, and is concerned about the rise of ETAs and what it might mean for their ability to travel around the world. This to me is the number one thing, top of the list of what they can do to think about being able to access those countries. Let me pause it now. Let me kick it back to Patrick here because I've been going for a while here. So Patrick, I'd like to hear what you think about what the rise of ETAs and targeting of speech, what it means for the value of citizenship generally, if you have any thoughts, and what it means for the potential values of particular citizenships.
Yeah, I have as far as the value of citizenship, citizenship provides you the you know, the right of entry into a country or even countries. And so for citizenship generally, I think the value of that speech laws make citizenship more valuable, mostly. And I think that for a bunch of other reasons, the rise of ETAs, just generally the compliance aspect of international travel in a data rich world, I think citizenship, even without the speech laws, is going to be inherently more valuable 10, 15 years from now. I think with speech laws like this, that it will be more valuable than that. The only situation where it is less valuable is with that extraterritorial application of laws, which in our scenario, probably right now, the best example is the United Kingdom. But again, I think for specific countries, I think the value of visa-free access goes down because an ETA is a a visa light, right? Essentially, um, and I want to put a little bit of a historical context on this. So um, think about all of the information that is created in daily life, be that through criminal records, be that through civil registration, be that through your social media accounts 10 years ago. And now think about that today. And the amount of information that you have created in those past 10 years is more than the previous 30 years combined. And it's all indexable. And that may sound like a goofy term, but it means that it's searchable. And I say this as someone who delves into historical information all the time. 100 years ago, especially in citizenship by descent, finding information is there's like maybe 10 records of somebody, if you're lucky, that survived from 100 years ago at seminal life events, right? If you can find a document that shows that they were aboard a steamship, or before 1895, US and Canada had an uncontrolled border. There's no records, right? And so what makes these records findable or searchable is the fact that they're indexed. um, and that was done historically by someone looking at the document and transcribing it. That is no longer the case. With I know we lean on AI as kind of a catch-all, but one aspect of AI is what's known as optical character recognition (OCR), which means you can scan a historic document and the machine reads it. You don't have to transcribe it manually. And you say, okay, why is this important? Well, if you're going back through history, you can search newspapers from 100 years ago in 5 seconds, right? Think about what they can do with the information today. It's automatically indexed, and if it isn't, uh, they can scan an image and it can read it. If you go on, I found this out the hard way. If you go on Ancestry .com, someone apparently uploaded one of my grade school yearbooks, and the machine it told me, "Hey, we think we know about a Patrick," and it showed me a photo of myself. Um, and so all of this is very indexable. And I go on this big historical example because I want to apply it to today. You hear about someone being arrested in London Heathrow over posts made on X. You hear about, I don't know, New York mayoral candidates getting roasted over tweets from 5 years ago, or posts on X now. Uh, these are people who are prominent, so there's attention being paid to them. But if you look at immigration thresholds at airports, or even worse, at land borders, it is very common. I don't in the U.S. a little bit. For them to ask you for your social media accounts. And that's them kind of asking you to do the hard work, because then they can just punch the machine up and have the machine run through all of your social media history. or index you against government databases that may have APIs to civil registration to confirm you say who you are. And so, is all of this important? Yes, but is it going to impact you? Sometimes it might, because they don't need something to be, provide, they don't need something to say, oh, this is probable cause necessarily at an immigration border. It is, and I know Parvis is, you probably have a lot of thoughts on this, but sometimes it's just a general suspicion. And because it is not a home or a vehicle, but you transiting through a border, that threshold is pretty low. So, um, the amount of information that is collected today, combined with this kind of visa light ETA approach to travel in the future, combined with the technology we have to read all of this information in lightning speed, means that having citizenship is going to give you the best access around the world. It means that having a cleaned up criminal record, a cleaned up civic registration record, or even a cleaned up social media record is probably going to benefit you. It might not benefit you at all right now, but the days when it's needed, it'll be a very, very huge, valuable benefit.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. So the United States does have as an optional question on the ESTA application form your social media handles. If you don't put that in there, you could be denied. You could be kind of taken aside by CBP and asked for that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, CBP doesn't have to have probable cause to ask you about these things. They don't actually know. Here's the thing. Cops don't even need to have probable cause to ask you about these things. Okay. The reality is the vast majority of people willingly answer questions and give up information to cops, even when the cops have no probable cause. Because if they ask you and you volunteer the information, that doesn't require a warrant. They're just asking it. Most people are so afraid of law enforcement that they just give it up right away. But even in context, even at the border, they don't need probable cause to ask you and then just deny you entry to the country because you refuse to answer it. The the DS 160, okay, which is the form that people use to apply for a tourist visa in the United States, also asks for social media. And people who have not been putting the social media forms in there have been being delayed having delays in their processing since about the spring. Charlie Kirk being assassinated, right? Which is a terrible tragedy. Okay, I want to make it clear. Okay, that's a terrible tragedy. He being assassinated kicked off people that are, I guess, anti-right, Kirk, celebrating his assassination or making comments like he got what he deserved, et cetera, et cetera. And the U.S. Department of State went through and found. I posted an article actually from I think just a week ago. U.S. Department of State canceled and continues to cancel on a rolling basis visas of non-U.S. citizens that they found that are celebrating somehow, in their opinion, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Right, so easily indexable. All this stuff is easily found, findable. You don't have to be a sleuth to find what somebody is reporting online. And if you have something that they want, like access to your country, you can force them to give you up the information, just like you said, Patrick, by putting the just a question on there that asked for the social media accounts, right? And nowadays, I mean, if you're under 50 years old, right, it's I'm not saying there's nobody under 50 that doesn't have social media. Obviously there are some, but I believe is going to raise the suspicion for a lot, if not the majority of adjudicators, if you are applying and you're a relatively young person, let's say under 50, and you say I don't have any social media at all. It's not the case. It's not likely for the majority of people, right? Now, as far as access, gaining let's call it a more robust form of access to these zones, okay, these uncontrolled border zones, right? We're all in agreement. Patrick, you and I are in agreement. I think others are in agreement that participate in our spaces, that citizenship, of course, is the gold standard, provides the immediate highest right of entry. But citizenship is also harder to get generally, right? So if you want to, and let's just talk about what I think is probably the most relevant scenario. Americans want access to Europe. Americans love Europe. We're big Francophiles. We love everything European. Okay. If you want secure access to the European Union, okay, um, you're going to have a hard time going straight away for citizenship in most cases unless you have a claim by descent or ancestry, right? Patrick knows that. Patrick is a consultant. He helps people with CBD. I, of course, also I'm an attorney, and in this capacity, I work as a consultant and I help people with European citizenship by descent. Outside of those circumstances, you're going to be, most people are going to be pretty limited. Okay. It's not totally shut off. Okay. There are some other paths. Okay. So, for example, citizenship by marriage, true citizenship by marriage, not residency by marriage. True citizenship by marriage is available in France, right? For, after 5 years of marriage to a French citizen, even without being resident in the country, a person can apply for French citizenship. And then, of course, we have kind of these more rare instances of citizenship by merit or exception. But the bottom line is, most people are going to have a much harder path to citizenship in the European Union than a residency application, in my opinion, generally speaking. Okay. So what I think is going to happen, and it'll be interesting, I record these spaces so we can go back and evaluate predictions and say, hey, that was on point, or hey, you really got it. You're totally off point here, Malakouti. And it'll be interesting, right? A couple years down the line to maybe crack open some of these spaces. But here's what I think is going to happen. I think it's going to take people being denied, okay? Americans being denied, right? First, it's going to be the people with the worst profiles, okay? So criminal records, travel to war-torn areas, okay? After that, I think it's going to be people who are really controversial, that have big platforms, that say what things that are considered odious, okay, to European officials or whatever other officials, okay? And once the knowledge that people are being denied on this basis, vulnerability, and people get denied on this basis, people are going to start looking for solutions. Okay. Citizenship, gold standard. Most are not going to have a path to citizenship. A lot are going to have, right? EU has, EU's is, 20 some countries. A lot of people are going to have some sort of path towards residency, okay, in an EU country. And I think that's what's going to blow up in the short term there, okay? I think we're going to see there's going to be an opportunity for countries that are still offering, or maybe new countries that are going to offer residencies, whether it be permanent or temporary, with fairly easy eligibility criteria, low physical presence requirements. Okay, so a residency that does not require the person to be there for a lot of time, maybe 1 day per year, etc. And then some sort of assurance, okay, whether it be an explicit assurance or settled law, that having that type of residency does not get somebody caught up in the tax net if they spend under a certain amount of time in the country, so under 183 days or whatever it is. I think that's going to be the opportunity that we're going to see. There's already some countries in the EU that fit that bill. Okay, only time will tell in 5 or 10 years if those countries are still as attractive as they are now on this basis. But that's, in my opinion, what the opportunity is going to be. I think a few countries are going to step up and fill that role. Okay. And these things are cyclical. What's going to happen? Okay. First, there's going to be a trickle of people. Years are going to pass. More and more Americans are going to do that thing. Okay. Then a lot of Americans are going to do that thing. Then some Americans are going to be publicized having been doing that thing, okay, in order to have an end around of ETA. Then there's going to be pressure on those countries, okay, by either European Union or the Guardian, okay. Those countries are going to have to defend the policies. And then, it's cyclical. Same thing that happened with CBI, okay, same thing that I think is going to happen with citizenship by merit, right? Good thing happened, a good opportunity becomes available. A few people get it at first, more people get it later. A few people get it who abuse it. That becomes publicized. And then there's pressure on the program. And who knows where we'll be then? I mean, maybe that's 15, 20 years from now. Maybe there'll be new dynamics and we'll have more information about what strategies work. But this is what I see. This is what I think kind of, I would put this, I'll just go ahead and say, I think in the 7 to 10 year range from now, we're going to start seeing this strategy really become prevalent. Americans and others from other citizens of other countries that are outside of Shenzhen getting easy residencies in the EU for the purpose of being able to forego the ETA and therefore not have to, every time they travel to the country, be worried about a denial for all those factors that we said before.
Yeah, I'm gonna just piggyback really quickly and also say that there's a factor I don't think people are projecting into the future very well, and that is that if you say something that a government doesn't like and they deny you for something as what we perceive as simple as an ESTA, that also creates a record. And so, whether or not that country shares that information with another country, which is very frequent in Europe, this could have a compounding effect into the future, which creates more of a headache. And then, if you have to obtain a residency right through another means, then you also have to overcome this record or history of having been denied because you said something they don't like.
You're absolutely right. There's this domino effect. Absolutely right, Patrick. Right. It, being denied, you could apply for a mobility benefit. Let's include ETAs in the definition of mobility benefit to a country that maybe you don't even care about that much. Maybe you don't even really value it that much. Okay, but you say, hey, what's worse? Worst? What's the worst that could happen? I'll apply. If they deny, okay, fine. I don't go there. I'm not that interested anymore. But what about the domino effect? You get denied there, then you're applying for an ETA or another mobility benefit in a country that you do care about. And one of the questions is, have you ever been denied a visa, an electronic travel authorization, etc., from another country? Okay, well, that's a problem now. Okay, that now having applied, now you realize it wasn't so low stakes for you to send that ETA application to the country you really didn't care about, right? Because now you're faced with a situation of either reporting that denial, right, and risking a denial of a country that you do care about, and even making your profile worse for further countries because now you can have two denials on your record, or lying on that second application, right, and then creating a latent liability of being discovered down the line. Okay, so that's an excellent point. And I think it raises the stakes. I think this has the effect of raising the stakes. Okay, of being denied for an ETA. Okay, like it matters now, right? If you get denied for an ETA, because what countries are doing by asking, have you ever been denied access or ETA or visa to another country, is they're trying to marshal the due diligence on a crude level. They're trying to marshal the due diligence capabilities of other nation states. They're trying to say, okay, hey, this other country vetted you and they denied you. Okay, we want to know about that. We'll incorporate that into our decision making, right? Excellent point, Patrick. I'm glad that you brought that up. We have a comment from King of Sardonica. Let me read this here. So King wrote, in addition to personal interest reasons, frequent travelers care about unimpeded access to major flight hubs, e.g., UAE and Qatar for travel between Southeast Asia, Australia slash Australia and Europe, Japan and Korea as hubs, between North America and Southeast Asia, UK or EU as hubs between North America and and Eastern Europe. Yeah, that's a great point, right? Travel hubs matter. Travel hubs have a disproportionate value. Okay, what I would call a travel hub, right, is a city that has a really big airport. Okay, that services a lot of places. Okay, so if you don't have access by a visa or visa free to a country that has an airport in it that requires a sanitary transit, okay, meaning being able to go through with access to the country, then you're going to be you can have a hard time. You can have a harder time basically traveling to places that you do have access to, right? And Patience is Alpha. Patience had a comment yesterday on X, or maybe it was the day before. He wrote negative 1,000 points for landlocked Plan B countries, right? And I pushed back a little bit. I said, I think it might be over. I agree, but I think it might be overstated. He said, okay, fair enough. Minus 100 negative points, right? And the reason that I push back a little bit is because you can also access the country not just by boat, but if you have visa free access to one of the bordering countries, okay, of that landlocked country. So still a vulnerability, right? Still another layer, okay, that a potential point of failure, but nevertheless, another way of accessing that country. But his point is well taken, though, right? Like it's not just about having access to your countries of citizenship, okay, in terms of meaning that they'll let you in. It's about physically, literally being able to get there, okay, through our lattice work of international travel by trains, planes, and automobiles.
Yeah, I'm gonna also. I think I saw that same post by Patience is Alpha. I think he was dunking on Paraguay a little bit, because it's landlocked, technically accessible by the um, Paraná River, but I think the point about having access to a hub is really important. And this is actually something I don't know, so I'm gonna actually pitch it to you, Parvis. For the ESTA program for the United States, does that apply if you're just transiting through in a connecting flight? So I'm going to ask, like, if you're going from Europe to Latin America, generally you're going to be transferring through JFK or Miami. Do you need anything extra in terms of a mobility asset to make that transfer? And I ask that question with this context because the UK's version of that is required even if you're just transiting through London Heathrow, or Gatwick, or one of their hub airports. If you're on your way to the European continent, coming from the United States, if you're going to, you know, end up ultimately in France or Spain or Italy, you still have to apply for and get that ETA. So kind of let's compare both of those because the United States, through some of its airports, is a hub for some people. London is definitely a hub for the European continent.
Yeah, you do need access. You do need to have some sort of access to the United States. So US visa or ESTA. There's actually, Patrick, something called a C visa for transit. It's specifically for the purpose of transit to the United States. I've actually never seen one before, like in my practice. That would be interesting to see. But no, I mean you can't if you don't have ESTA or otherwise, visa-free access or some sort of visa, generally, no, you can't. You can't travel. You can't like layover in the United States. And obviously, the United States has huge, huge airports that service a lot of places. So yeah, you're vulnerable to countries that have big, powerful, sprawling airports if you cannot, access them.
I bring that up because that's what I thought. Because if you look at as a side hobby, I do like to comb through all of the accessible flights uh, in the world, and every flagship carrier in Latin America, if they fly anywhere in Europe, it's to Madrid, right? It had for historical and cultural and legacy reasons. That's true. So even a smaller fleet, like the only European destination you can get to from Paraguay is Madrid, um, on a single flight. Um, I think of Panama a lot as a hub because, Copa Airlines services all the flights from North America. They collect there in Panama, and then they, in the evening, all fly down to Latin America to all of the, major airport hubs. But if you're a person, say Latin American, and you can't get that visa for the United States, you basically have no choice but to go through one of your carriers to Madrid and then on to wherever you want to in Europe. And that isn't necessarily a reflection of speech, but it is a reflection of your ability to get a mobility asset that isn't tied to your destination, but tied to your ability to travel and be mobile.
You're absolutely right. And all of these concepts go hand in hand with one another. You can't really just ignore the rest and try to deal with one in a vacuum. And Patrick, your point, this is just yet another reason that I try to explain to people, and I write that you generally want to be working towards more mobility assets. Okay. Like I wrote an article, very short article about this concept I called visa-free redundancy. Okay. And I was trying to explain the concept that you don't if a place is important for you to go to or to be, you don't want to have just one form of access if it's as fragile as something like visa free access. If you have one form of access but it's your citizenship or residency there, okay, or it's citizenship in a country that has uncontrolled borders with it, that's one thing. That's more of a robust level of access. But if you have visa free access to a place, and that place matters a lot to you, right? It might be worth thinking about doubling up, okay, and getting some sort of redundant access to that place, right? Um, you know, I guess I'll use this opportunity to just harp on something that comes up over and over again in my spaces, because it's something that, it's kind of like one of my theses slash theories, right? Um, it's been years now, probably 4 solid years, that I've been just, at least in the beginning, feels like shouting into the void about the absurdity of quote unquote ranking passports based off of their visa free access. Okay, so Henley and Partners, list, and I don't want to name others, some other people, in the industry who know me, but they have lists that are, similar. Okay. I don't want to name names, but we all know who they are. Okay. These passport strength lists based off of visa free access. I've been shouting like a madman into the void for 4 years about how not only is it just inaccurate, okay, but it's inaccurate in such a way that I think has like almost permanently distorted the mental model of millions of people to their own detriment. Okay, like I literally think, and I deal with this, I know this is the case because I have people in consultations, and we have to really talk about passport issues, real passport issues, and we have to talk about citizenship issues. And I have to spend like the first 15, 20 minutes unparsing and undoing this you know this confusion, okay, that's been created. Okay, visa free access is important. I'm not saying it's not important. Okay, but first of all, it's a quality of nationality. It is not a quality of passport. And secondly, as I've been saying hand in hand, and more people have kind of been echoing the same sentiment, at least people that I connect with. It's not the most robust. First of all, you have to think about the mobility assets in gradations of robustness. Okay, very few people, at least among the big influencers, even talk about this. Okay, they are not equally robust. Your ability to enter your country of citizenship is not as robust as your ability to enter a country that you have visa-free access to. They're not. They just are not. They're not. They're not the same level of value. They're not the same level of robustness. Not today. Not over a timeline. Okay. Same thing with satellite residency rights. First and foremost, you have to think about citizenship and passport as two separate things, because they are two separate things. Okay, now, are they related? Yes, they're related. Everything literally on earth is related. They have some sort of relation. Yes, they are related. Okay, but the most important asset of the citizenship, okay, in my opinion, okay, when you account for robustness, okay, is immediate highest right of entry to that country. That is the most important benefit of a citizenship. And people take that for granted, right? Because I think because people like counting up numbers, right? It's like it's easier to literally just count numbers from a Wikipedia article. Okay, count up countries that supposedly certain citizens have visa-free access to, than to actually get into the nitty-gritty of evaluating these things, comparing these things. Okay, but for anybody who's listening to this, multiple citizens, aspiring sovereign individuals, etc. Okay, really think about what is citizenship and what is passport. Okay, I don't want to bore people, more with talking about like the differences. I've talked about it on many spaces. I have hundreds of tweets about it, several articles about it. Okay, make sure you understand the difference between citizenship and passport. And then when you're thinking about citizenship, you need to categorize the benefits that they have and understand that they have drastically different levels of robustness attached to them. Okay, drastically. Okay, and this is part of the reason that I have scoffed, and I still scoff. Okay, at any quote unquote passport ranking index, which is no such thing, of course. It's really citizenship ranking index that puts a country with a tiny landmass, okay, at the top. That to me is an automatic deal breaker. Okay, why? Because the most valuable benefit of that citizenship, of as with all citizenships, is highest immediate right of entry to that country. And if that country is a few hundred kilometers of sand, okay, or island, okay, that means that the benefit, the core of the benefit of that citizenship, which is your ability to go to that, to that place of country, that the country of citizenship, is tiny, and the rest is fragile. Even if that country right now has great visa-free access, and there's a couple countries, I've dunked on them enough. I don't want to mention them by name, okay, but there's a couple countries that I've mentioned, before, okay, which are at the top of these lists, which is an absurdity. Okay, right now, they have visa-free access to a lot of countries. I'm happy for them. I'm glad for them. I want everybody to be able to travel to as many places as possible. But you must understand the fragility of that. Okay, visa-free access changes like that. Okay, not even at a legislative level, at an agency level. Okay, implementation of ETAs. Okay, denial of an ETA, denial of a visa afterwards. This is not a long-term robust mobility benefit, okay, that you can, you get the citizenship today that you can be assured to have 10 years, 15 years in the future, 20 years in the future, even 10 years in the future. Okay. So the way I categorize, okay, the mobility benefits of a citizenship is, first of all, you have to think about core mobility benefits and springboard mobility benefits. Core mobility benefits are benefits that you have from that citizenship that are within the entire control of that country of citizenship, not dependent on a foreign country, not dependent on a treaty with a foreign country, not dependent on good diplomatic relations with a foreign country. Okay, those are core mobility benefits. The most important one is highest immediate right of entry and residency in the country. Then you have springboard mobility benefits. Springboard benefits, okay, require the cooperation of a foreign country. Okay, why do we say springboard? Now, Patrick, you're here. Sorry, you have to listen. You have to suffer through all this. You already know all this stuff, but we have other listeners, especially that are anonymous. The reason we call it springboard is because you're using that country's citizenship as a springboard to get to another country. That's a landing pad. Okay, so top springboard benefit, visa-free access. I get citizenship in Portugal. Portuguese have visa-free access to, I don't know, Brazil. Okay, therefore I use my Portuguese citizenship in order to travel to Brazil visa-free. Okay, Portugal is the springboard. Brazil is the landing pad. Okay, visa-free access is the one that everybody knows about, but obviously we know that there's way more, springboard benefits as well. Okay, like satellite residency rights, what we have in the EU. Okay, I'm a citizen of Croatia. Okay, by virtue of Croatia being in the EU, I can take up residency in Czechia. Okay, and have to file minimal paperwork or no paperwork. That's a satellite residency right. What's a core residency right of Croatian citizenship? The ability to live in Croatia. That's the core. Okay. So I don't want to go through all of the different types of springboard benefits, but the point is you have to think about citizenship in these terms, not necessarily exactly the terms that I think about them, but you have to understand that there's gradations in the nature of the benefits, the robustness of the benefits, and how vulnerable they are to degradation. All right, that was a good rant. I had to get that one out. I think that was a good 7 to 10 minute rant there, but I think it was timely, right? Because you can't talk about the effect of speech on one's mobility, especially in the context of vulnerability to ETAs and visa-free access, without looking at the nature, okay, of what is an ETA? How valuable, how vulnerable are ETAs? How valuable are ETAs, right? So, I think this had to be said. Okay, so we've been going for about an hour and 12 minutes. I think we're going to bring this home. Any last thoughts, Patrick, before we wrap this space up?
I think we did a good job covering all the bases. I think a good like capstone to it also is just to keep in mind where this conversation would have been 10 years ago and where it likely will be 10 years from now, because the time factor on this is a big component of it. We're going towards a world where speech is searchable, any information is searchable, and in a world of enhanced mobility, but more regulated movement, this is going to be key. So I think keeping not just the present day in mind, but the future and where we've come from is a huge part of this.
Yeah, it's a great point. Okay, so here's my predictions, and I'll go even a little bit more granular than 10 years from now. Okay, I think in 3 to 5 years, Americans that have a criminal record, okay, as well as people from other countries, let's say first world countries that have a criminal record, are going to be sensitive to and now be aware of their vulnerability to ETA denials. Okay, I think in 5 to 7 ish years, I think all Americans are going to understand, okay, or most Americans are going to understand that an ETA is kind of like a visa application. It's visa light. Okay, so the two big differences, generally speaking, going to be that you don't have to go in person for an appointment, like you have to do with a full scale visa application. And then number two, you maybe don't have to go through the rigmarole of collecting, apostilling, and submitting certified copies of vital documents. Okay. I think most Americans, I think that will have entered the zeitgeist, the American zeitgeist, in 5 to 7 years. Okay. I think around that time, so the end of that time, so 5 to 7 years, maybe the 7 year mark, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more American citizens looking for residency in some of these zones, especially the EU, first and foremost the EU, in order to secure their ability to enter the zone without being potentially denied an ETA. Okay, in parallel with all of that, okay, so I think we're going to continue to see a march of people, especially Americans, understanding the value of citizenship. Okay, second citizenship, third citizenship. I made a post a couple years ago. I think it was maybe end of 2023. Okay, where I said basically now Americans are all about getting a good second citizenship. They're like, I want a good second citizenship, but they still kind of turn their nose up to citizenships that don't necessarily have a deal breaking extraterritorial obligation attached to them, but just are not, a citizenship that has like strong visa free access or something like that. It's from a country they think of like a lower tier country. I think that's going to change. Americans, and this is what I wrote in 2023, Americans are going to start understanding in about, I think I said like 2026, that any citizenship, okay, if it doesn't have those extraterritorial deal breakers, is a mobility asset, an important mobility asset, even if it's in a quote unquote crap country. And I've talked about the concept of the bridge residency, the plan B, destination, even if you don't want to stay in that place, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, Americans are waking up to this. They're going to continue to wake up to this. Okay, like I think now it's pretty hot now. Okay, Americans want a second citizenship, an increasing number of those Americans are starting to look to ancestry, even if it's in a country that's like not in a glamorous like headline grabbing place like the European Union. And then as far as speech and ETAs, okay, so I'll just reiterate. Okay, so ETAs, I think the first denials, okay, worldwide we're speaking, are going to be criminal records. So criminal record number one, previous orders of removal and travel to certain countries slash war-torn areas tied for number two, okay? And then number three, okay, and increasingly, I think we're going to start seeing denial based off of just speech, not even illegal speech, okay, just what's considered offensive speech, okay? And as is always the case, the hottest, people with the biggest followings, the Tates, the Candace Owens, are going to be targeted first. But the easier it becomes to collect that information and to index it, which we know is happening rapidly, okay, the less important the person and the smaller the platform of the person that's going to be targeted. Okay, so those are my predictions. Patrick, what about you?
Yeah, I think so. I think so as well. I mean, I mean, the reflection of a country's policies are generally a reflection of their domestic politics. And we look at the UK because it's Western and we say, how is this the case, right? With their speech laws. But there's dozens of other countries that have some form of speech restrictions that impact the ability of people to travel. Um, and, it's just too easy to search anyone's history both intentionally or unintentionally and find something that is can be used as a basis for restriction. And I think that that's, to your point, Parviz, I think that's going to be especially true for Americans over the next 5 to 7 years. I think you have enough of like you have enough of baby boomers who have been told their whole life but never did anything about citizenship by descent. I think you have a lot of Gen Xers who are a little bit burned out and are looking for early retirement that they can't afford, and therefore saying, "Hey, why not buy that house in the south of Spain, for 75 euros or whatever, and fix it up?" And your ability to do that without some form of residency or access on an indefinite basis is that you can't do that without it, right? So I think it's going to be something that is going to become more commonly understood among the educated crowds of Americans in the next half generation.
Absolutely. Okay, I have a small announcement to make. Okay, so this is our 44th mobility space. We've been doing two per week since about the early spring, so pretty torrid pace. I said we're going to do 50 this year. We are going to do 50 this year. And I said I would evaluate what I'm going to do after number 50, how I'm going to continue, if at all, what format it's going to continue in. And I think I've come to the conclusion of what we're going to do. Okay, so we're going to continue to 50, okay, at the same pace, two per week. After 50, I'm going to take a short break and we're going to continue the mobility space series, okay? Possibly indefinitely. We're going to continue at a different pace. The pace is going to be weekly, okay? We're going to do one per week instead of two per week. But in conjunction, I'm also going to launch my own podcast, okay? And this is going to be an interview style podcast, okay? So I'm going to basically, the podcast is going to be basically, one guest, maybe two guests, okay? And we'll focus the conversation between them, and of course people can comment in the comments, etc. But I probably won't have like live speakers on that podcast. So after number 50, we're going to continue this space. I do love this open format for the spaces where just anybody can dip in and say what they want to say. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it when I started, but I've loved it so far. So yeah, after number 50, we're going to continue with the spaces at one per week, and then I'm going to launch the mobility podcast, okay, long form podcast. The podcast will be probably 45 minutes to an hour long, okay? And then this space, it's still TBD. If we go down to one per week, maybe we'll keep the default as 1 hour. Maybe we'll make a new default of an hour to an hour and a half. But I just want to throw that out there. I'll probably pitch this announcement in the remainder of these spaces just to give all of the listeners a heads up so that they can know what to expect and don't think that I disappeared off the face of the earth when I take a break after number 50. Okay, so that's it. I want to say thank you to everybody who showed up. Patrick, of course, great co-host, great conversation. King as well for your written comments. All of our anonymous listeners. And then I don't have a topic for mobility space number 45, which means the interwebs are going to decide. So I'm going to put up a poll today. I'm going to throw out 4 topics that I'm interested in. Please keep an eye out for that poll if you are interested and vote on it. Leave a comment if you strongly prefer one topic or another. And then by tomorrow, I will choose the topic, and that will be our topic for mobility space number 45. On Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Remember, all of these spaces are generally Mondays and Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you, everybody. Oh, so excuse me. Today's Thursday. What am I saying? That will be Monday. Okay, it will be Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Mobility space number 45. That's it. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you, everybody.